Hello everyone, welcome to Methods 2, Week 6. Today we will be continuing to develop not only our assignment 2 part 2 final detailed model, but also the landscape model that we worked on last week. In particular, we're going to be using the stepped topography. So for now, if you can open your stepped topography contour model, which should look something similar to this. We can double check and make sure that we have the appropriate layers. Right now I have my curves in a separate layer than the contour poly surfaces, just for a little bit simpler organization. And you want to be sure to also have your Rhino model. For this tutorial, I will be using an example project that is located in your Canvas Module 6. You can use that for this tutorial, or you can go ahead and use your selected building. So for this assignment, we will be importing the model that we have been working on, our building model, into our landscape model. And one way that we can do that is if I go back to my contour model, I can just type import. And I go and find my file, preferably saved in the OneDrive. For instance, this example building here. So if I import that, it automatically imports to the location that it is in the previous model. As you can see, it's located here. I'm just going to go ahead and group this. If you do not group it as soon as you import it, then all of the objects on this in this model will just be loose, right? And it's a lot harder to try and find and select everything. We can still do it by turning off certain things. Then we can group it. But it's easier just to group it as soon as it comes in. That way we can easily drag it to where we want to place it on the contours. Let's say you actually worked in your previous model with various iterations. So you might have multiple instances of the same model in your base file. Let's say I've been working on certain different parts, but the final that I want to actually export or import into our landscape model is this last one. What we can do is go to our building model, select it, and say export selected. Or it's a file, export selected. And then we can just save that as a new file. So save it in my downloads real quick. Then we, similar to the last, we just go into import, test, there it is. So those are the two ways that you can either export a selected model from your original building file or import a file directly into your landscape model. Now we need to be able to place this building into the landscape rather than it just floating or being at the Z level right now, the base Z. So first I'm going to turn on my O snaps, right? O snaps, we need to make sure these are on. I'm going to have my end, intersection, perpendicular, and mid turned on. And you can turn on anything that you deem as necessary. And all that's going to do is I'm going to snap to this endpoint here of the building model. and snap it to somewhere in the landscape. Let's say like here. Now we can see that our building is resting on top of that landscape. But we can see like the stairs are a lot taller than they need to be. And some of this area back here is actually digging into the landscape. So first off, I'm going to move our building where the stairs are meeting the ground. We'll just move and then select vertical. I'm going to move it to where it intersects with that layer. Now we can see like it's definitely intersecting some of the topography. And if I go to my Arctic view, I'm going to change my water just to a material that shows transparency real quick, which we can just do by glass. We can see that this once very empty pool is now full of terrain, which is not what we want. So how we can fix that is one of two ways. We can either Boolean difference, and this is only applicable if you're working with closed polysurfaces. If you're working with open polysurfaces or closed non-manifold polysurfaces, it will not work. It'll be working with only closed polysurfaces, as that we can see here. Bring this down for layer management. So let's do the first wave, where we just Boolean difference. So I'm going to Boolean difference. I'm going to select the contours, because that's what I want to subtract from. I'm going to use the building. You can see that the Boolean difference has failed. That could be from various different reasons. Let's kind of take a look at that a little bit further. For instance, it could have happened just because of the surface that's here. When we're using Boolean difference, we have to use like things. We cannot use a 2D surface to Boolean difference away from a 3D object, for instance. So if I try that again, Boolean difference, subtract from, let's just do these elements right here first. I'm going to use the wall of the pool. We can see that that actually did subtract them. So if I turn off the water, you can see that all three of these layers have been separated. And then what intersected the pool walls has been deleted. I'm going to go back now. Go back to undoing the Boolean difference. I'm going to turn off the water again. Another way that we can do it, especially if you're not working with closed polysurfaces, is just rebuilding the simple geometries that we have here. So I'm going to go into my 4 views. That way I can easily see the extent of the building. I'm going to draw a couple of these boxes. So this first box is just the pool, and it goes down all the way to the pool layer. I'll bring it all the way down. Then we have the stairs. Similar thing, I'll bring it all the way down to that nearest layer. Now what I'm going to do, instead of the Boolean difference, I'm going to Boolean split. I'm going to select those layers. I'm going to select those 2 boxes that I just created. Delete those boxes. And I'm going to see that now all of these layers have been split away. But right now everything is still reading to be on the same layer. So let's do a little bit of layer management real quick. First off, I'm going to delete those because we don't need construction lines. First off, I'm going to create a parent layer that our building can sit in. Let's call this example building. When we're talking about parent layers, how a layer affects certain things, like if I see this top and it's in the top layer, if I turn that off, it turns off only that element or what belongs to that layer. However, if I have a parent layer, which all I'm doing is selecting all of these objects that the building is in, all these layers that the building is part of, I'm going to drag it and put it into that example building. Now, if I turn off that example building, it turns off everything that belongs to it, including those elements in those layers. So we can see that by the light bulb that's half on, half off. Similar thing if we lock it, right? It's still there, we just can't select it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that layer off just so we can see the topography. And I'm going to select all of that topography. All I did was drag from the left to the right, and all that does is only select things within that window. If I was to drag from the right to the left, and we see we have the dashed lines, it will select everything that crosses that window. So left to right, just want to select those elements there. And I will create a new layer. I'll just name it Topo Removed. And I'll put it in that layer. I'll give it a different color that we can easily see it. Just give it violet. So now if I turn that layer back on, our building layer, we see that all of this material or earth will need to be removed if we were to place the building in this location. And that's what it would look like. So that is one way that we can edit the terrain to subtract volume or embed our building into the landscape. However, we can also do additive form of landscaping, which is building up the landscape around your building. For that instance, I'm just going to continue using this same location. I think it's fairly fine. But instead of having these pull walls exposed like this on these four sides, I want to kind of have this similar condition that happens here, where it's just a few inches above the ground. So how do I manipulate or transform this existing topography to match what I want it to do? We can do it a couple different ways. First off, we can duplicate. Well, first off, I'm going to create a new layer. So added. Just change the color again. That way we're able to easily see what belongs to what. I'm going to select that layer. And I can, as simple as just redrawing the desired topo line. It's going to be from here to, again, this is kind of where you're able to make up your own design and your ability to be creative. So that line looks fine, and then I'm going to redraw another line over here, maybe like that. So this is the start of our lines. Since I was drawing that in the top view and it was snapping to various different points, I know from the top view it looks fine, But when we go into perspective, it may look something like this, which is not good. What we can do to clean that up is just set PT, and you'll have a pop-up come up that asks you, or has all these checkboxes for X, Y, and Z, because we want to make sure everything is in the same Z axis. That's the only thing I'm going to have selected. I click OK, and I have it stop here at this top level. Now we can see that we still maintain that same curve that we drew in the top view, and it is all on the same z-axis when we look at it in perspective, which is good. Now what we can do is we need to close this curve, right? If we just extrude this how it is, it'll just extrude a single surface, but we need it to be a 3D object. So what we could do is either work with the existing lines that we had turned off, right? Work with these existing lines, make sure they're on the same level. I'm just going to set PT quickly again. So we know that from this point of the line, where the green matches the red, to this point, when we extend this red, is new topography. And we can just easily redraw that line. Then I'm going to use curve boolean. Don't necessarily want to delete that input right now. Now we can see that we have this new curve that has been created. I go ahead and turn on my lines again, and I extrude on my contours again, and I extrude this new curve that we created. Extrude it down 1 foot. You can see that it again intersects some elements that we do not want it to. Now, we could have solved that a couple different ways. So if I undo, select this curve again, what we can do is outline the edge of our building that we want to maintain. Which I'm going to do very quickly. Like, we want to maintain this line. So there should not be any earth in those lines. If I go to the top view, we can see that only in this area here and this area here are what we are adding. So we can curve boolean. And this time I will delete all used curves, because we don't need to just have duplicative amount of curves. And we can see that the highlighted areas are what we will be keeping. Again, it may be putting it on a different layer. In this instance, on the Z layer, 0Z. So what I can do is set PT. Extrude that up 1 foot. Now we can see that this new added topography matches with the existing, but it is also taking into account the building itself and is not intersecting the building. Okay. So we can keep creating those layers. I'll do a couple more really quick. Oops. PT. We can see what I did now is because I was only working perspective, it was not snapping to exactly where I wanted it to. So this is where we need to actually be careful of what viewport we're working in and what we're actually snapping to. So I'll just delete those really quick. So I actually won't be working in the top view, that way I know exactly the points that I'm drawing these lines. So I'll just quickly create these lines like this. There's one line, another line. I'll set PT. You see in our perspective, everything is looking a little weird. But when I set PT, everything is looking fine here. I'll get that curve back. This curve here. And just curve Boolean. When I'm looking at top view, this is the new topography I'll be adding. Set PT again to bring it to the correct level, and I can extrude that. Now that second level done. And I can keep doing that for the last one, but I think you understand the idea now. That is probably the easiest and simplest way that we can alter topography, by just redrawing those lines, making sure they're closed, and extruding them that way. We can also do more of a subtractive feature, which is I'm just going to draw this box. Bring it down 1 foot. Now I see this box that is here. Make sure it lines up with the edge of our topography. And make sure it goes past here. All I'm using is scale 1D to scale it in those one directions. And that seems fine. In order to select an element like an edge, I can hold Control and Shift, and looks like I just selected that one edge. I can easily drag that with gumball. Select it right there. And so where's this one? Right. I'm gonna drag it to where it's not overhanging the top one. We can also use the Move tool and select it that way, and move it that way. And now we can Boolean difference. We want to subtract from this new topography using the existing terrain and the pool wall. So we delete that interior piece. Now we see that this other layer that we've created, while it may be a little bit more straight and angled, still works fine. and it has kind of merged or filled in some of these weird areas that we had. Okay, so that is a way that we can subtract from the terrain, but also add certain elements of terrain to make our building work. What I'm going to do now, select the sublayer objects because I want to group this building. I'm going to copy it by just holding Alt and the gumball. I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees. Because the third thing that we should be doing in this assignment is actually editing our building as well. So not only are we adding and subtracting terrain, but we're also altering the building as needed. So for instance, I have the building here and kind of steps onto the topography over here. Maybe I want to cut this back a little bit, that way we're not walking directly onto the stairs from the landscape, but we have a little bit more of a subtle entry. So I can Boolean split. I can move this to my removed layer. Delete that. So we created this nicer entry. But now we have part of this building that is floating. So what we can do is either build topography, right? That would go all the way down to the level of the existing, as I've just shown here. Which we could do that. There's no problem with that. It's maybe a little bit boring or not as of a creative solution. Another thing we could do is edit the building as it is. What I'm going to do for that is I'm going to still keep some of this topography that I created here, but I'm going to scale it to where the only added topography is in line with the actual building base. But this part of the pool that extends past the building face, I will actually use to break the pool and create a small waterfall moment. So we can do that easily by, I'm going to just duplicate the face border here, scale it using my gumball, create a surface, planar surface, and all I'm going to do is Boolean split. Just like the object's on the split, with the splitting object. I ungroup this now. You can see that this part of the pool has been split or broken away from the rest. I'm going to move it vertically to the lowest point on that site. You can see that about an 8-foot difference from what it originally was, which is pretty dramatic in this sense. Now all we got to do is kind of connect the dots or connect the pieces together. So I will go back to my pool layer and just draw these boxes that connect. There we go. Now our pool is functioning again. If we throw the water in there, it will flow nice and naturally. However, we still have this amount of topography that we need to remove, which we can easily do by using our steps that we did previously, just drawing a new box, Boolean split, select all the objects that we think will be intersecting it, select the object that we're using to cut those surfaces, delete that object now, and we can move all these poly surfaces to a removed layer. So there we go. In order to maintain the topography here, I'm just going to do a similar thing. I'm going to Boolean difference, subtract from the box using that topography that we've already cut away. Oops, it failed. Subtract from this. Sometimes when you're doing multiple complex shapes at once, you need to do it step by step, as I'm doing right now. There we go. However, if I isolate this, we can see that it is still one mass. Actually, we need to separate that into its different levels, which we can do easily by, I'm just going to duplicate this face border because that's the biggest part. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger just so we don't have any of those weird tolerances happening. I'm going to use a planar surface and copy this or array it down vertically at every foot interval. We don't want to split the top one, so I'll delete that top one. But if we Boolean split this, now we have separate individual contour layers. On isolate, and now that is what we are needing for this assignment. There we go. Now that we have the assignment modeled, let's talk about documenting it. In order to document this assignment, you're required to create a view that looks, two perspective views. One that looks at the building and the landscape, such as from like back here, looking at the building and the landscape. That way I'm able to actually see your design and your creative decisions when applying this building that previously was on a very flat site on a site that has more of a terrain. And then the other view was from your building looking out. So for instance, we can either drag the camera to where we can kind of find a space inside the building, maybe on this side. And I'm like in the building, right, looking out. I see this kind of waterfall moment. It's kind of interesting. See that I'm underneath the building here. Perfectly acceptable. We can also use the camera tools such as orient camera to surface. So let's say I want to orient to this surface, or if I'm looking at it from the distance, I actually want to orient it to the face here. So this is kind of getting into the realm of like a elevation perspective or a section perspective, where we're looking at one elevation in particular, but everything else is that perspective, which this is perfectly fine. Another thing we could do, which we talked about in the last assignment, was place the camera and target. So the new camera location can be if we're sitting on the bench, possibly looking at the top of the pool here. May want to edit it a little bit, right? But we can do stuff like this. Maybe I'm actually over here looking into the landscape. There we go. Again, make sure that everything is put on the layout tab. Creating a new layout, for instance. And we can save that as it is. Make sure you have your text by writing text. And make sure that this text is on the layout tab and not the workspace. How we can tell is if we activate the workspace, which I just did by double clicking. If we rotate this, the text does not move, which is what we want. Another thing that we can talk about real quickly is maybe I have this view that I really like, which was over here. I'm going to orient again real quick. I really like this view. I want to save this for future in case, I mess up or I do an editing and then I need to go back and retake the same view. So what we can do is go to set view, named views, and we can click this little save as icon. We can name it anything that we want. I'm just going to name it perspective test. So now we can see that in our named views, it has saved here with a little snippet of what we are looking at currently. So if I go through and just do, again, return back to where I was, I can go back to my named view. If you exit out that box, you can go to named views, or you can just click this perspective test, right? If I click name views, that dialog box will come back. But if I just click the name view, this perspective test will return me back to that view that I had. Even if I'm editing here, we can see on the top left that the perspective test now has an asterisk above that. That means that the original view that we had saved has been altered or shifted. We can always go back to that original view by just double clicking. And now that we have no asterisk, this is what it originally was. Okay, everyone, that should be everything that we need to know for editing our building in the landscape. Please come to class on Tuesday with any questions or problems that you have encountered, and have a great weekend.